Department reviewing his report as we speak. The Attorney General set to brief lawmakers on the principal findings as early as tomorrow. Good evening, I'm John Scott, and this is the Fox Report. Special Counsel Robert Mueller submitted his report to the Department of Justice late yesterday, wrapping up the nearly 2-year investigation into Russian election meddling and whether the Trump campaign colluded with Moscow. Attorney General William Barr telling Congress he remains committed to transparency. He pledges to consult with lawmakers on what information to make public. We have Fox team coverage on this. David Spunt is at the Justice Department. Jackie Heinrich has the latest on the separate investigations in the Southern District of New York. But we begin with Chief White House correspondent John Roberts reporting live from the North Lawn. John.
John, good evening to you. Things are very fluid in terms of this letter that the Attorney General William Barr is going to send up to members of various committees in the House as to what the principal findings, the principal conclusions of the Mueller report are. We had thought this morning that we would have it by now, and then we were told about noon. Now it's not going to be until tomorrow. The president's attorneys are telling us noon at the earliest, but nobody really knows for sure. And that's just the principal conclusions of the report. Getting to some of the meat of the details, the facts of the case, is going to take even longer, because in the facts of the case likely will be a lot of material that's classified, material that's subject to executive privilege. And though Barr wants to get things out as quickly as possible to show as much transparency, it is going to take some time in order to clear the material, even to give it to Congress, let alone to give it to the public. The president seemingly unconcerned about what the conclusions may show. We were told yesterday that he was glad that this part of the investigation is over. He spent this morning and part of the afternoon on the golf course over at Trump International. Last night at Mar-a-Lago, he was hosting a Lincoln Day dinner. In a video that was taken by a guest in the crowd, the president seems to be in a great mood. There you see him with the First Lady at his side, joking about the keynote speaker, Senator Lindsey Graham. Listen here.
So I said, if Lindsey's speaking, I want to come down and hear him speak. For 2 reasons. Number one, he's a great speaker. And number two, I know if I'm here, he's not going to say anything bad about me. Right?
The president clearly in an expansive mood last night. Now, as the process goes forward, there's a chance that Barr may have to run the conclusions by White House counsel Pat Cipollone, and that man that you see standing next to the president, Emmett Flood, he is the president's in-house counsel dealing with the Mueller investigation. Cipollone and Flood might have to look at whatever it is that Barr wants to release to make sure that there's no material in there that is subject to executive privilege, and they may have to ask for redactions in whatever is released as well. We don't know yet, because we don't know what's in the Barr report, in the Mueller report, rather. Democrats have already laid down a marker that they want to see not just the conclusions, not just the facts behind the conclusions, but the entire report, and that the end of the Mueller investigation does not mean that this is over. Here's Michigan Democrat Dan Kildee.
I think it's important to note that just because there has been no indictment doesn't mean there's no collusion, doesn't mean that there was no obstruction in the typical sense of the term. So, I think the president's still going to have a lot of questions to answer.
Now, then, there is a very important clue in what Kildee just said, John, that we don't know if there's collusion, we don't know if there is obstruction. There may be some evidence in there, which is why the White House is fully expecting that Democrats in Congress are going to push as hard as they can to get the entire report out, not just what is selected by the Attorney General William Barr. And they may even go so far as to ask for all of the investigative materials that went into that report, which is hundreds of thousands of documents, documents that are all subject to executive privilege, hours of interview and depositions with White House officials, communications within the White House. And the White House will fight tooth and nail to make sure that stuff does not become public, because they believe that you need to keep that stuff secret in order to be able to run the government. So they're preparing for a battle royale here at the White House, and they clearly understand that the filing of this Mueller report does not mean that this fight is over. John?
That is the case, John, but it also seems that Democrats are disappointed with a report that they haven't even seen yet. Is that fair to say?
You know, John, I think what was probably really disappointing for the Democrats was when the Department of Justice came out and said that Robert Mueller is not recommending any more indictments, which is a suggestion that there was no findings, that the president was guilty of malfeasance to the point where he would face criminal charges. And we do know, too, from a letter that Rod Rosenstein sent to the then Judiciary Committee chairman in the Senate, Chuck Grassley, that you can't really talk about misconduct by people who aren't being charged. So everybody's bracing for this report to not really contain much about what the president might have done wrong. John?
John Roberts, our chief White House correspondent there. Thank you. All eyes now on the Justice Department, where a senior official tells Fox News Attorney General William Barr is reviewing the Mueller report, quote, hand in hand with Deputy AG Rod Rosenstein. David Spunt is live at the Justice Department with more. David.
Hey, John, we've been here all day, and the Attorney General, William Barr, has been here for much of the day, too. There's actually no indication that he's left. We have not seen him leave. From the moment he came in, John, into this administration, he said that he was for transparency, especially when it comes to the Mueller report. And from what we're hearing, he wants to get the summary, the key bullet points out to members of Congress as soon as possible. Now, we do have some video of Mr. Barr leaving his home this morning on the way here to the Justice Department, where he was joined by his deputy Rod Rosenstein and other key members. He did leave late this morning. Now, he and his small handful of aides have been reading through the report, but this is not something, John, that's being circulated around the entire department, and definitely not through email. DOJ officials want to make sure that there's no classified information before just releasing it to Congress or releasing it to the public, for that matter. Special Counsel Mueller has been deliberate since he took over this investigation almost 2 years ago to keep this thing from leaking. Many would say he's done a great job because we still don't know exactly what's in this report.
Republicans and Democrats should not get over the tips of their skis either way. We don't know what is in this report. It's a war and peace, a lot of pages. We don't know if there are exoneration of individuals, including the president.
Now, this comes an important task to decide what can be released to Congress, what can eventually be released to the public. Barr said he would take great care when releasing this information, but there's always that catch, John, that parts of the report could be classified or could pose a threat to national security. Meanwhile, as we found out from a senior Justice Department source, there are no more indictments. That certainly is gaining a lot of attention here at the Justice Department and beyond. But all indications are right now that William Barr, the Attorney General, Rod Rosenstein, both behind me in this building, looking at that document that they've been doing for some time. And we're told that they will be back at work tomorrow morning. John.
David Spunt at the Justice Department. Busy times. Thank you. So the Mueller probe may be wrapping up, but the legal showdown is far from over. Federal and state prosecutors in New York City continue to pursue investigations related to President Trump and his associates, some of which grew out of Mr. Mueller's case against former Trump attorney Michael Cohen. Jackie Heinrich is live in our New York City newsroom with more on that. Jackie.
Well, John, right now there are at least 6 entities linked to President Trump under investigation. And those cases aren't limited to collusion, but they're looking at conspiracy, fraud, campaign finance violations, money laundering, foreign contributions. Still, the president seemed unconcerned yesterday morning on Fox Business Network.
I said to my lawyers, are we being looked at here? They don't even know what people are talking about. How many breaking news stories was there about me that turned out to be non-existent?
We've broken down the cases by jurisdiction. In the Southern District of New York, investigators are looking into hush money payments the president's former lawyer, Michael Cohen, paid to adult actresses. Cohen pleaded guilty to campaign finance violations, and prosecutors implicated President Trump in that crime, saying that Cohen acted at the direction of the president. They're still investigating the extent of the president's alleged involvement. They're also investigating President Trump's inaugural committee and possible illegal donations from foreign nationals, and 2 cases stemming from President Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort. And New York State is investigating the Trump Foundation, the Trump Organization, the president, and his family, specifically whether they took advantage of the foundation's tax-exempt status and used it to help the campaign. The Attorney General is also investigating whether the Trump Organization inflated assets to get better loan terms. Those cases could uncover links to the president.
The president is not yet out of the woods. Legally, yes, there may be some ongoing investigations. We will see.
There are going to be a lot of loose threads that other agencies are going to be able to pull now as a result of the information that was gathered in that probe.
The president is also facing lawsuits outside those cases, including one from Apprentice contestant Summer Zervos, who's suing for defamation and claims she was sexually assaulted. The president could be deposed in that case and might have to testify under oath. Nationwide, there are more than a dozen state and federal investigations that grew out of that Mueller probe, plus a number of congressional inquiries. John.
And Jackie Heinrich. Jackie, thanks. For more on all this, let's bring in Robert Ray, former Whitewater independent counsel and a former federal prosecutor as well. No further indictments seems to be the linchpin that so many people are seizing on to say, okay, the president and his team have been pretty well cleared here. Is there anything that we're missing, anything that jumps out at you?
Well, it's not only that, it's also that the investigation is over. I mean, I don't know how more clearly Bob Mueller could have spoken than to have delivered a report which signals the end of the investigation, at least as far as what he was asked and designated by Rod Rosenstein to do.
Right, and because a former assistant director of the FBI, Mark Morgan, spoke earlier today and said that Bob Mueller is as thorough as it gets. Listen.
I worked for Bob Mueller his entire 12 years as director, and what I'm very confident to say is that when he completed his report, it is just that, it's complete. There's no stone that's left unturned, and so when he says I recommend no indictments, the investigation is done.
So you don't expect to see further action coming out of this?
Which part of done is unclear. When I was independent counsel, the statutory mandate was prompt, responsible, and cost effective. And you can add to that, by an effective prosecutor, thorough, all of which Bob Mueller has proved to be. That is to say, 22 months, an investigation from beginning to end, and it is now concluded. So that, that's where we are. I mean, people can talk about dangling threads and all they want about other things that are out there. Of course, there's always something out there, but the principal mandate here, in order to determine whether crimes were committed in connection with the election campaign and potential collusion with the Russians, has now reached its finishing point, meaning that there are going to be no further charges within that mandate.
Ken Starr, with whom you worked pretty closely, said pretty much the same thing. Here's Ken Starr earlier.
The suggestion that there was collusion was, from everything that we've seen, utterly unmeritorious. It just was without foundation. So let's say close the chapter on that. Let's deal with Russia. The real threat is not was there collusion. There wasn't. No public evidence of any collusion whatsoever. But the Russian interests are indeed a threat.
And nobody has ever denied that. Russia is a threat. But was there collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia? Doesn't seem to be any evidence of that, according to what we're seeing.
It appears that the answer to that question is definitively no. Now, there are other issues that obviously this investigation spawned, one of which was the question about obstruction of justice. And I think it's appropriate for the American people now to wonder, and this is why we're all waiting to see what will be released out of the Mueller report to Congress and ultimately to the American people, and that is, did the special counsel come to the conclusion that no crimes were committed that were provable that could be brought, or did he make a determination that with regard to the president it was not appropriate to bring charges because of Department of Justice policy that would have precluded it? I suspect the answer to that question is that he found insufficient evidence, and that's a substantial finding because that, of course, covers not only the collusion mandate but also issues with regard to obstruction of justice. And therefore, I disagree with Democratic senators who've said, well, of course, just because Mueller finished his investigation and he didn't find any criminal wrongdoing relative to either collusion or obstruction of justice doesn't mean that we shouldn't be pursuing it. Hogwash. That's baloney. And a well-founded article of impeachment would have to constitute a high crime or misdemeanor. And if there's not a criminal violation with regard to obstruction of justice or collusion, as however anyone wants to define it, that means that it also should put an end to any impeachment inquiry as well.
But you've heard Democrats talking about the possibility of subpoenaing Robert Mueller to testify before Congress. Bob Barr, the Attorney General, they want to subpoena them.
Well, they can do that, and they can threaten that, and they can issue subpoenas if they would like. I suspect the answer is going to be, first of all, the Justice Department is going to stop at the water's edge of the report as it is made public and delivered to Congress. That will be the end of it. If they subpoena Bob Mueller and or Bill Barr, the Attorney General, I suspect they will say, listen, we have said all we intend to say. It's contained in the report, and that's it, and we're not going any further. And furthermore, any effort by House Democrats to subpoena the underlying investigation, meaning documents and raw data and FBI reports and so on and so forth, I think is going to be met with a very stiff objection of executive privilege, and also the fact that there are ongoing investigations within the Department of Justice which would preclude that dissemination to the Congress and to the public.
And to just reiterate what you said earlier, you don't think Congress is going to find anything that Robert Mueller didn't already take a look at?
Well, they certainly have the ability to conduct an investigation on their own if they choose to do so. What I don't think they can do, though, is just, issue a blanket subpoena to the Justice Department and say, essentially, give me everything you have. That's, they can do it, but it's going to be met with an objection. Mm-hmm. And even if that objection were to be challenged and faced a court proceeding, I imagine that a court will overrule any effort by the Congress to obtain that information.
Robert Ray, former Whitewater Independent Counsel.
Thanks very much.
You bet. Thanks. It's taken close to 2 years for Special Counsel Robert Mueller to wrap up that investigation. 2 years of waiting and all the debating. You might have forgotten how it all began. So just what brought us to this point? A report on that next. After one of the most talked about and argued about investigations in Washington history, Special Counsel Robert Mueller's report is now in the hands of Attorney General William Barr. The probe lasted nearly 2 years, and Catherine Herridge takes you back to the beginning and through the timeline right up to today.
He unfortunately had to fly back to Washington unexpectedly.
On May 9, 2017, President Trump fired FBI Director James Comey while he was traveling in California. The White House released a memo from Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein to justify Comey's termination. Media accounts later portrayed Rosenstein, just 2 weeks into his job overseeing the Russia probe, as badly shaken. With Comey out, Andrew McCabe took over as acting FBI director. May 16th, Robert Mueller, who was FBI director after 9/11, interviewed with President Trump and Rosenstein to replace Comey. The following day, Rosenstein appointed Mueller as special counsel, writing his responsibility is, quote, to ensure a full and thorough investigation of the Russian government's efforts to interfere in the 2016 election. New documents, testimony, and text messages show that the 10 days following Comey's firing are a pivotal period when senior FBI and DOJ officials apparently pushed back against the White House. Rosenstein, McCabe, and others discussed secretly recording the president and removing him from office, though they disagree over whether it was serious. From the president's former personal attorney Michael Cohen to former campaign chairman Paul Manafort, the special counsel has either indicted, convicted, or gotten guilty pleas from more than 30 people, including 6 former Trump associates and more than 24 Russian nationals. The president has repeatedly called the investigation a witch hunt.
There's no collusion.
During his confirmation hearings for Attorney General, William Barr took a different position.
I don't believe Mr. Mueller would be involved in a witch hunt.
Despite a team of seasoned prosecutors and a budget of more than $25 million, the special counsel has not prosecuted a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russia to steal the election.
Do you have the Mueller report? Do you plan to release the Mueller report publicly?
Under federal regulations, Mueller's report to the Attorney General is confidential. Barr will summarize the findings for Congress and the American people.
But my purpose is to get as much accurate information out as I can.
On Capitol Hill, Catherine Herridge, Fox News.
Growing questions on the political fallout as the Mueller probe winds down. Democrats threaten to subpoena the special counsel's report if it is not publicly released. We'll have live Team Fox coverage ahead. Plus, President Trump heading to the golf course in Florida amid the showdown over the Mueller report. So what will the apparent end to this investigation mean for the president? And how is the White House handling this big moment in history? The president yesterday again slamming the investigation. We'll talk to Dana Perino next.
It's just a continuation of the same witch hunt. They know it, and behind closed doors, they laugh at it. It's just a continuation of the same nonsense. Everybody knows.
They wanted Mueller to be protected, and now we have his report, or the Attorney General does. And so people should think of that report as the best assessment of the evidence. And whatever comes out tomorrow, if it comes out tomorrow, for the conclusions that have been reached, then we go from there. From the White House's perspective, I think it's been very smart not to say too much. The president doesn't know what's in here. As far as we know from yesterday, the press secretary said, we have not been briefed. We've not seen the report. And that might have changed today, but we haven't seen that update. So in the meantime, the president can let his press secretary and then his lawyer, Rudy Giuliani, speak for him. I think that speculation is not useful right now, and it's really hard if you're at the White House. It's a temptation that's very hard to resist, because it does look, right, on the surface that everything's going to be great for the president. We don't know that for sure. If it turns out that he's totally cleared, you will hear the mighty lion roar, and he will give a severe tongue lashing to his political opponents, but there's plenty of time for that.
Alan Dershowitz, who is, not necessarily a fan of the president, he calls himself a Hillary Clinton Democrat, but he's been defending the president a lot in this particular investigation. And he says that he thinks that the White House should get a chance to see this early so that they can sort of come up with a defense against the claims. Listen.
This will be a one-sided report. It will draw every conceivable inference against the president. They did not hear exculpatory evidence. The witnesses against the president were not cross-examined. That's why I called for the Attorney General not to release the report immediately.
So obviously the White House would like that opportunity, but apparently they're not going to get it.
Well, yes. Here's the thing. I also think that we've got Mueller, who was not interfered with by the administration. You have a new Attorney General who has a stellar reputation and the utmost of integrity, trying to do his best to make sure that this investigation comes to a conclusion. And he said in his testimony, when he was getting confirmed, I want to be as transparent as possible. And I think he will do that. In our country, there is a separation between the Justice Department and the White House, though it's all part of the executive branch. And I think that the Attorney General is trying to do something not just to help the White House, right, but he wants to make sure that the American public that has been waiting for 2 years, and we could wait one more day for him to take a little bit of time, get these conclusions to a point where they can release it. But still, John, that won't be enough for the critics.
Well, and what is coming out tomorrow is not the report.
No.
It is the principal conclusions of the report.
It's Barr's interpretation of the principal conclusions of the report. Right. So you will see, I think that the Democrats are saying we have to see the full report. We have to see everything, because they're going to try to cherry pick it. One thing that's difficult at the Justice Department, it's like playing Operation. Remember when you had to very difficult? So they're going through and trying to redact information. And you have to find out what is grand jury material, what is classified, what is intelligence sensitive, what is subject to executive privilege. If you mess up on something like that, it could really cause some stumbles. And I think they've handled it so well so far that there's no need for them to rush. They should just get that right.
Democrats obviously are clamoring for everything to be released, for, indictments, for testimony, everything they want. The president is saying that this whole thing has been something of an excuse for the opposition party. Listen.
They came up with an excuse for losing an election. This should never happen to another president, because most presidents wouldn't be able to take it. I know the politicians. I know the president. I know what we're dealing with. Most people wouldn't be able to take it. Let me tell you something, Maria. What happened to me should never happen to another president of the United States, because I depend on this right here, mine, not other people.
Does he have a point?
Sure, he does. But the Democrats are going to say, well, we have a point. Right? We want to see this. And because we already know that the House Democrats and the grand poobahs of the chairman now are saying we are going to continue to investigate, I think it will be interesting to see what 2020 Democratic candidate has the ability to lead, meaning how can you pivot and say, all right, the Mueller investigation is done. It is what it is. Look at me. Look at how I think that I have a better way to make America great again. I'm focusing on policy. The Mueller report is in the past. If a Democrat can do that, great. If they instead continue to go on this, I'm not going to call it a witch hunt, but if they continue to do all of these drawn out things, then I think it will look like political payback for the loss in 2016.
Well, pretty much all of the announced Democratic candidates thus far have suggested that this is going to be sort of, you know, a nail in the coffin for the president or something like that. Cory Booker even sent out a fundraising plea attached to the fact that the Mueller report is public.
So premature and inappropriate, right? So the White House hasn't commented on this report, right? And I know that when you're running for president on the opposition side and you're trying to make a name for yourself and you're trying to raise that money, you do things that you might not otherwise do. I think that's highly inappropriate. And what we should all want is for us to find out that there was no collusion. Like, why wouldn't that be a great outcome? If we find out that the Russians were trying to interfere, but they were not successful, that, to me, would be a good information to have. The other thing we should get from the Mueller report is just how strong the efforts were from Russia. Are they trying to do it again? And what are we doing to protect it in the next election?
Dana Perino, here from the Daily Briefing. Good to have you on.
Good to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. Be sure to catch Sunday Morning Futures tomorrow. You will not want to miss Maria Bartiromo's interview with President Trump, conducted just days before the Mueller probe finally ended. That's tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock Eastern Time, right here on Fox News Channel. So, reaction to the Mueller report coming in from the campaign trail as 2020 Democratic presidential candidates push for the full report to be made public. Among them, Beto O'Rourke and Bernie Sanders, who made campaign stops today. We have Fox News team coverage on the political impact of the Mueller report. Peter Doocy on Capitol Hill. But we begin with Jeff Paul, who is live in Los Angeles. Jeff.
John, some of those presidential hopefuls campaigning today are sending a clear and loud message. They want everyone to see the Mueller report in its entirety. Now, Senator Bernie Sanders, who right now is campaigning here in California, was not shy about his thoughts. He's rallying in Los Angeles today, but last night while campaigning in San Diego, he went on for a bit to address the situation.
Now, I don't know what's in the report. Nobody does. I do know, however, that Mueller wound up indicting 34 people, including 6 Trump campaign officials. Nobody, including the President of the United States, is above the law. The American people have a right to know.
Former Texas Congressman Beto O'Rourke joined Bernie Sanders and is speaking loudly about the topic on the Mueller report. He started his day in South Carolina, but is now heading to Las Vegas for a rally tonight. But before he left, he held one last event in Charleston where he made some sharp comments despite not seeing the report yet.
You have a president who, in my opinion, beyond the shadow of a doubt, sought to, however ham-handedly, collude with the Russian government, a foreign power, to undermine and influence our elections. The sanctity of the ballot box, the ability for each and every single one of us to make informed decisions about those who seek to represent us and hold positions of public trust.
Other candidates like Senator Kamala Harris, who's in Texas, and Senator Cory Booker, who's in South Carolina, were more guarded. Both briefly mentioned the report at some point today, but mostly just saying that it needs to be released. Senator Amy Klobuchar, Senator Elizabeth Warren, and former Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper are all in New Hampshire today. All three have made a call for the full release of the report as well. John?
All right, Jeff Paul in Los Angeles. Thank you. Meanwhile, a huge fight looming on Capitol Hill as both sides of the aisle gear up to battle over the Mueller report's findings and how much of them to make public. Peter Doocy live on Capitol Hill with that. Peter.
John, more than 120 Democratic lawmakers dialed into a conference call today, and they never talked about impeachment proceedings, but they did all agree they don't want to hear one word about the Mueller report from the Justice Department that is classified. They want anything the DOJ comes to Congress with to be unclassified so that members can start talking about it right away in public. A source passed along something that Nancy Pelosi said at one point on this call. She said, I thank the members for joining us on such short notice, but it is an emergency conference call. The purpose of the call is to hear from our chairman, so I will be very brief and only say that the takeaway from this call is that the American people deserve the truth. To know the truth, transparency is the order of the day. That is what Chuck Schumer and I said in our statement. If they don't get their way, though, Democratic Committee Chairman Jerry Nadler and Adam Schiff are prepared to subpoena Robert Mueller. But some Republicans are essentially urging their Democratic colleagues to stop digging.
I think the Democrats are going to look fairly silly. I think certainly Adam Schiff, as chairman of the Intelligence Committee, is going to look silly if he continues to jump up and down and claim that Trump is a threat to our national security with respect to Russia if Mueller doesn't find one. We need to turn the Intelligence Committee back to a focus on national security and working with our intelligence communities.
So Republicans are saying they trust whatever it is that Robert Mueller comes to them with, whatever it is that he found, while Democrats are saying the results might not be trusted until they've had a chance to look at all the material Mueller used to make up his mind. John?
All right, Peter Doocy on Capitol Hill. Peter, thank you. So, should the full Mueller report go public? We'll ask a Republican on the House Judiciary Committee when Congressman Ben Cline of Virginia joins us next. Lawmakers are awaiting a letter from Attorney General William Barr summarizing the principal conclusions of the now finished Mueller report. The special counsel delivered it to the Attorney General late yesterday, and we are told Congress could receive those findings as early as tomorrow. Meantime, both sides of the aisle calling to make the entire thing public. Joining us now, Republican Congressman from Virginia, Ben Cline. He's a member of the House Judiciary Committee. Congressman Cline, thanks for joining us this evening. Are you among those who would urge the Attorney General to make the entire report public?
Well, absolutely. Everybody needs to see the report, and we need to take a collective deep breath, especially my colleagues on the other side on the Judiciary Committee. We need to wait to see the facts before we jump to rumor and innuendo and hypotheticals. It just doesn't help anything. So hopefully we'll see the report in its full entirety next week.
I don't know if you've heard this from a fellow committee member who comes from the Democratic side, but here's what Steve Cohen of Tennessee has to say.
Chairman Nadler would make that decision, and he's made it clear that he would do that. Okay. And I think his committee, I know his committee is strong and will support him in that. So I think that he will be, if we don't get the report in full to our satisfaction, that Robert Mueller will be subpoenaed before the Judiciary Committee.
So if he doesn't get the full report, he would like to see Robert Mueller subpoenaed to appear in front of your committee. Your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that's fine. If that's what the chairman wants to do and have Mueller before the committee, I'm more than happy to welcome him to ask him questions about the report. The report does need to be made public, and we need to know all the facts. The worst thing that could happen would be for parts of it to be redacted or covered up. That would just give the Democrats more fodder to say, what's behind the redaction? What aren't we seeing? Maybe there's the smoking gun there. You know, we just need to wait for the facts, and when the facts are out, I think we'll all know that we can move ahead at that point.
But the Attorney General does have license. In fact, he has obligation to make redactions of items that came from grand jury testimony, for instance, or items that deal with national security, right?
Sure, and there are ways to inform Congress about what's behind the redaction and what information is being withheld and why it's being withheld. But the full report does need to be made public, and I look forward to that happening next week.
Representative Dan Kildee of Michigan says that he's not one of those who is rejoicing if, in fact, this report doesn't show any criminal wrongdoing by the administration. Listen.
I'm a Democrat, but I don't think anybody should be wishing for bad news for anyone. We shouldn't want to see collusion. We shouldn't want to see evidence of significant problems within the administration. We do have a responsibility to look at the facts, make a clear-eyed judgment about what those facts say. And frankly, the picture that's been painted so far is troubling.
We just had Robert Ray on, former Whitewater independent counsel. He said, look, there is nobody more thorough than Bob Mueller. And if Bob Mueller says, you know, this investigation is over, it's over. Do you get the impression that Democrats in Congress are ready to say the same thing?
I wish that that were the case. Unfortunately, some running for president and some on the Judiciary Committee are already making politics of the report before it's even out. And so I hope that once the facts are out, that we'll have a recognition by all involved that any lack of evidence of collusion is a good thing, and we should be happy if there's a clear report, and that happiness should extend to both sides of the aisle.
There is, there are no further indictments coming. We do know that, but we don't know much else about what is in this report. Are you going to be, you have said the whole thing should be made public, but when these primary conclusions, these, first conclusions are released tomorrow, how much longer is it going to take till you get what you want, the full report?
Well, I'm an attorney who was a prosecutor before I got elected, and I'm used to waiting for the facts. We're going to wait for all the facts to come out. Just hope my colleagues on the other side, particularly those who are also lawyers on the Judiciary Committee, are patient as well and wait for the facts instead of jumping to conclusions or trafficking in rumor and innuendo.
So you don't think this is going to be the end of it on Capitol Hill? This is just going to open up a new chapter of investigation and arguing?
After listening to some of my colleagues, I've only been in the House for 2 months now, but after listening to some of them, they will keep on going as long as they get the free air time. They'll fill the air with more hot air.
Congressman Ben Cline, Republican from Virginia and a member of the Judiciary Committee. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will have much more reaction to the conclusion of the Mueller investigation and what to expect when the Attorney General sends that highly anticipated letter to lawmakers. That's next. 2020 floating some radical-sounding proposals to reshape the U.S. Supreme Court. Are any of them realistic? Fox News chief legal correspondent Shannon Bream has more on that.
All the options are on the table.
Some White House wannabes are talking up a judicial redo, an effort to tap into lingering progressive anger over President Trump's two nominees for the High Court, Neil Gorsuch and Brett Kavanaugh.
When it swings back around to us, what are we going to do?
The solution for many Democrats, more is best, reforming who can serve and for how long. Among the proposals, rotating justices on and off the bench from the lower appellate courts, and term limits for currently life-tenured federal judges.
Term limits for Supreme Court justices might be one thing, to give every president the ability to choose 3. We have people holding on to those seats in ways that I don't think is necessarily healthy.
South Bend, Indiana Mayor Pete Buttigieg has his own plan.
One idea that I think is interesting is you have 15 members, but only 10 of them are appointed in the political fashion. 5 of them can only be seated by unanimous agreement of the other 10.
The Constitution does not establish a set number of justices. That's up to Congress. There were initially 6 members of the High Court, then 5, then 7, then 9, down to 8, 10 for a while, back down to 8 before finally settling on 9 a century and a half ago.
I will appoint justices who will not undertake to override the judgment of the Congress.
Franklin Roosevelt's audacious court-packing plan in the 1930s to add up to 6 justices met with widespread public and political condemnation and was soon abandoned. It's no secret the other 2 branches have long chafed at high court rulings limiting presidential and congressional power. So to change the decisions, the thinking goes, change the deciders. With more choices, a new Democratic president could quickly offset the current 5-4 conservative majority.
We would have no interest in that whatsoever. It'll never happen. It won't happen. I guarantee it won't happen for 6 years.
So help me God.
Some court watchers think the current Democratic expansion tease has little chance of success.
Something that's controversial could be bad for the Democrats, indeed, in the 2020 election. If you start adding justices for purely partisan motives, that can't help but divide the country even further.
There are prominent Democrats on the Hill cautioning their colleagues in the 2020 PAC not to waste time on what they're calling a fool's errand with regards to radically making over the High Court. And while they may be split, Republicans aren't. GOP lawmakers in both the House and Senate plan to offer up measures to stop any attempt at packing the court. In Washington, Shannon Bream, Fox News.
Washington on edge now as special counsel Mueller's report is finally in the Attorney General William Barr's hands. He could reveal Mueller's conclusions as early as tomorrow. The political and legal impact of all this as the Fox report continues with special coverage at the top of the hour.